They came up with another model of disease that is what we call web of causation. Web of causation, this simply means causes are sequential and interlinked multiple causes of disease. So there are what? Broad classes of events, and also it indicates what? Incomplete portrayal of the reality. There are things that we really don't know. But if you put several factors together, then you can describe the disease to some extent, but it also indicates incomplete understanding of reality. This is Renatus, but a very good example of web of causation is really avian influenza, highly pathogenic avian influenza. You know that disease is very fatal in poultry. When it occurred in humans in Asia, the mortality was like 73%. Not mortality, the case fatality rate. Case fatality rate was like 70% or 73%. But that disease is really, yeah? Oh, sorry.
Do you know what pig flow means?
Yeah, what I was trying to say is, about this web of causation, as I said, just the meaning itself is just represent what we call sequential and interlinked multiple causes of a disease. And it also indicates, because we cannot name, especially a particular necessary cause, it also indicates incomplete understanding of the reality. But we just put certain conditions together to make some sense out of it. So a classical example that I was talking about is avian influenza, highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's very fatal in poultry. And as I said, case fatality rate in human in South Asia was close to 73%. But that disease in other birds, especially other migratory birds like waterfowl, is totally asymptomatic. So those birds do not show any sign unless they get a disease from poultry. So there are several factors that need to interact in order for that disease to occur. So that's what there are things that we really don't understand about that disease, why it just happens in poultry or in humans and not in those species. Waterfowl, again, when waterfowl gets the virus from poultry, now they will develop the disease. When they give them to poultry, they are normal, but when they get it back from poultry, now they develop the disease. So there are several things that we really cannot describe, but as I said, when you put everything together, then you see certain things. Another model is the wheel model. This is basically similar to epidemiology triad, but what it says that this one removes the agent factor. It removes the agent, and it says that disease is caused as a result of what? Interaction between the host and the environment. But the environment is now divided into three segments. Social environment, crowding, as I've said, physical environment, the climate, temperature, and what you have in the biological environment. This is where they put etiology, vectors, and everything. So, because obviously environment affects the vectors or the agent, so that's what it means. So disease occurs as a result of interaction of the host and the environment. So they are just identified these host and agent factors. The third and important one is called the pi model. The fourth one is the pi model. In this model, they put a complete pi as one pathway. So when each of these slice of a pie is a component cause, So when you put all the pieces together, the pie is now what? Complete, and that forms what? A sufficient cause. So that's what it means. But it also means that different diseases have what? They have different pathways of forgetting. For example, we can take lung cancer. The major cause of lung cancer is what?
Smoking.
Yes, smoking. But there are a lot of people who get lung cancer who never smoke. So lung cancer, smoking is what? It's not the necessary cause. It can be the major cause, but it's not the necessary cause. As a result, so you can take this pathway, for example, for smokers. But you still have another group who never smoke. For example, you can say these one are people who are exposed to asbestos fibers. Asbestos fiber also called lung cancer. But again, there are what? Other groups who are never exposed to asbestos fiber, who never smoke, but still develop what? Lung cancer. So there are really things that we don't know in that case. So as a result, we have what? Several pathways or several sufficient causes for a disease. So for lung cancer, as I said, for example, you have what? Three different factors. So individual factors or pieces are component causes. When you put everything together, or the complete pie forms a causal pathway, that is sufficient cause. But sometimes you may have what? A component that appears in every one of them. Then that one we call it a necessary cause. But again, a necessary cause is not a sufficient cause. The sufficient cause is what? You have to put every pieces together. Again, the good thing about this pie model is that if you can identify any of these factors and then act on one of these factors, then you block that pathway. So for example, in this group who developed lung cancer as a result of smoking, if the people stop smoking, then this pathway will not occur. If people are not exposed to asbestos, then this pathway is also blocked. So the good thing about this pie model is that if we just act on one of those factors, then that would block that pathway from occurring. So it is really very important model.
So the cause three is first is smoking only, second is asbestos. Plus cause three, what if they smoke together, smoke and
That's what I'm saying. Just forget about smoking, forget about asbestos. There are really people like me and you who never smoke and who were never exposed to asbestos, but still develop lung cancer. So you have to create a column for that group.
So there's a sufficient three.
Yes, that's sufficient three, exactly,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not understanding what the individual factors would be. If smoking is the sufficient cause, what is an example of it?
No, in this case, no single case is sufficient. No simple factor is sufficient, no. You have to put everything together to make it a sufficient.
So that would be a category.
Say, for example, in this group, you have smoking, but there are several smokers who really never develop lung cancer again. Okay? Smoking by itself is really not a necessary cause of lung cancer. So there must be some other factor really that lead to development of cancer as a result of smoking. But smoking by itself really is not sufficient cause for lung cancer. So to make it complete, all these pieces have to be put together. Then that is sufficient cause for this one. Yes?
So what you're saying is like the component cause would be like A, smoking, and then E would be like
Something, yes,
asbestos.
exactly, yes. Yeah.
But all of them together, like the asbestos and the smoking, is considered sufficient.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yes. But any single cause is really not enough. So if you are lucky to identify one of those component causes and then can block it, then that pathway is not sufficient cause anymore. So lung cancer will not occur.
No, there is a confusion here. Again, sufficient cause. You said A is different, B is different, C is different. Unless
These
they
are
don't
all
come to
different factors.
Yeah,
yes.
if you combine together, then sufficient.
Sufficient cause.
So what if you bring A as a smoking and B as the second factor?
Asbestos.
Asbestos.
No, that's okay. It can be, that lung cancer can be attributed to smoking, or it can be attributed to asbestos. That is really what is important is whether lung cancer is there or not. or whether risk factor is there or not.
So what is the difference between sufficient 2 and sufficient 3 then?
This one is asbestos is there. Is asbestos.
But we brought asbestos there too,
Where?
in the case 1.
Case one?
You said smoking, asbestos, or other factors all together.
This is really just an example. Just take it as an example. What we know that 3 conditions that are really a risk factor for lung cancer. One is smoking, the other is exposure to asbestos fibers, the third is radiation.
Okay.
These are the 3 causes of lung cancer that we, but there are several other chemical agents.
Okay.
But these are the 3 that we know. So what I'm trying to say is that in the absence of any of these, radiation and asbestos fiber, smoking is a major risk factor for lung cancer. Okay? Second to smoking, asbestos fiber is also another risk factor for lung cancer. Okay?
Okay.
So, but what I'm trying to say is that even in people that never smoked and that were never exposed to asbestos,
Some
still
other
lung
factors.
cancer can occur.
Some
So
other- I got
there
it.
are really factors that we don't know. So when I put this sufficient cause, I'm just reserving it for those who were never exposed to asbestos factor, fiber, and also those who never
I
have
got it.
smoked.
So I got, so smoking is a main point you've taken it.
Yes,
So,
that's
so
what
I
we
got
know
it.
today, yes.
I got
Smoking
it.
is the major. I thought I saw a hand, no? So, what are these host factors now? Again, if we are looking at this separately now, now most of the events that you see in disease are dependent on the host. That means the host controls the outcome of what? The outcome of infection or the outcome of disease. That means if the host is not susceptible, disease will not occur. That's really as simple as that. So what he says that types of events, like clinical signs and lesions, are under host control. That means the host has to be susceptible. As a result of that, if the host is susceptible, that's what really we talk about, what? Population at risk. If we know that a given population is susceptible, we know that is population at risk. So what are these host factors? Intrinsic, which are genetically governing factors, are these, including race or species in animals, age is common to all, and then physiological state. Extrinsic, that is exogenous. Then we have animals used, for example, in humans we have several factors, including health behaviors, leisure activities and drug use, socioeconomic status, access to health care. So those are some of the host factors. Now, if you look at them in isolation, species, for the interest of, I think everybody else, not only veterinarians, but because we are dealing with several diseases. There are several diseases that involve multiple species. I talked about H5N1, which is avian influenza, highly pathogenic avian influenza. As I said, it has what? Different outcome in different species. That means outcome is not an indication of pathogenic potential.
Different species mean then different genetically trait?
No. I'm talking about host species, like animals,
Okay,
like
host
dogs,
species, okay.
like cats, yeah. So this one, I think veterinarians, you know this. What is the most feared disease? Animal disease. The most feared animal disease in the Western world, in the US, in Europe. Animal disease, pardon?
Sorry, the most?
The economically fair disease.
Foot and
What?
I don't know.
You
I
say-
just read it, but I'm not sure.
Foot
and mouth disease, yes.
It's foot and mouth
It's
disease.
foot and mouth disease.
If you travel abroad to Europe, I don't know Mexico and the US, I mean Canada, but if you travel to Europe, there is this custom declaration sheet that you fill. Have you ever traveled recently to Europe or Africa especially? Africa, no? So the first question they ask you about, especially apart from that identity, is, have you visited a farm? That is the first question. Have you visited a farm, and do you have animal product? Do you carry any animal product? Whether it doesn't matter whether it's cooked or not. So that is about this virus, viral disease. But you know what? Which species are affected by foot and mouth disease?
Cattle.
Yes.
And human also.
The most susceptible ones are
No, cattle.
Goat. Pardon?
Caprins?
What is? Ungulate, yes, yeah. But let's say cattle. Okay, and then what? What else?
Goats.
Sheep and goat.
Yeah.
Those are resistant, but there is another species, pigs. So in terms of severity, the most animal that develop the most clinical sign is a cattle, lesion around the mouth and on the feet. Then the second in line is pigs. The pigs, the sign is really not that much severe, but the problem is they produce a lot of virus. So they clone of virus, so they amplify the virus in the environment. Sheep and the goat, they are, even if they develop this very mild disease, but most of them they even don't develop anything. But look here, the quines are resistant. Quines, as I said, humans, they are resistant. So what I tried to say is that, as I said initially in the first and the other slide, the clinical disease is not an indication of what? Pathogenic potential of the agent. The host is the one who determines the clinical sign or lesions that develop. It's really not the agent. So that is what, and why they will determine it, because of these several reasons. Availability of receptor cells. If the host doesn't have receptor cells, then the disease will
What you said in last points, that why it is?
Pardon?
The last point, efficacy of immune mechanism.
Availability of receptor cells. So if the host doesn't have receptor cells, then the disease will not develop. So again, epidemiologists also try to describe disease, especially when we're talking about biological characteristics in terms of ethnic and racial groups. This one, they usually look into biologic, how we look, that's the race, and other cultural or social groupings, like religion, like tribes, and nationality. So these conditions are most of the time really don't indicate what we just talked about, like biological susceptibility or resistance. That is really not the case. Most of them, it is just this difference in exposure. Most of the time, because of what? Because of this grouping nature, then there is a difference in susceptibility or exposure. They can also indicate other factors that influence the risk of disease. For example, access to health care. So if you say that one community or one race is more affected than the other, probably this race is what? This race is forces to what? Form a given social grouping. Rather, because of that social grouping, where you have what? Large number of a given race, then that group can be what? Can have less access to health care. So really what we see, especially in human, it's really not a biologic phenomenon. Most of it is related to other conditions that affect exposure to disease, and at the same time also lead to maybe the other factors that influence the occurrence of disease. As I said, conditions like access to health care. So this is what you see, ethnic and racial groups in the US. You see African Americans, for example, you would have high breast cancer death rate, high prostate cancer death rate, high hypertensive heart disease. So that is what you see. But again, there are very few credible biological evidence that indicate this group is what? Highly susceptible. No, there is really nothing. It's just because of what? Access to health care or use of health care. Mexican American, as I said, most of the time, that's why they recur again, high obesity, non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. But again, there is no genetic evidence that indicates Mexican Americans are what? Susceptible to obesity. No, it's just the way of what? Probably eating habits or environment or something else.
Socioeconomic.
Again, many diseases are associated with age. So we also have age-specific rate there. If you see in infant, infectious disease and communicable diseases are very common. In adolescents, you have other conditions. In adults, like so many of you don't fall in that group, but still in that adult you have these are sexually active groups who have HIV, and then in older group it's a different condition, chronic diseases such as heart disease and cancer. So if you are planning health service, then you really have to reach out to each group differently. It's not like one size fits all. You have to act differently in different age group. With sex, again, that is very obvious. Most of the time it's really simply because of anatomic, but sometimes it's sexual or difference in male and female, or just gender-based differences. Sometimes it really indicates occupational level of exposure. Can anyone